Hey everyone, Sci-Fi Fish here. This is a channel where we discuss science, hence the sci part of Sci-Fi Fish, philosophy, Sci-Fi Fish, really just meaning talking about anything and everything. Everything's on the table for us to talk about, everything related to life, the universe, and everything. And then fish, meaning I'm a believer, I'm a Christian. I take the Word of God, the Bible, to be literal, true, and I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And so that's who I am, that's my belief. I'm setting it out there. That's my bias, if you will. And with this channel, I want to be looking at all aspects of life from this perspective, from the perspective of being a Christian and a scientist. I'm educated as a scientist. I have 2 degrees, 2 bachelor degrees from the Institute of Technology at the University of Minnesota, 1 in geology and 1 in geophysics. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of background on me, on myself, before we get off on this channel and get into more specifics. So I came into university with my eyes wide open. So I was raised a young earth creationist, and I came into college knowing that my perspective on the origin of the world and how it works and all of that was a small minority of the people that I would be interacting with, my professors and my fellow students. So that was obviously the case. And for the next 4.5 years, I was literally in the belly of the beast. I mean, geology is one of the, I would say, the 3 major fields that try to undermine the Bible, the biblical view, the young earth creation view of the formation of the earth and the universe and all of that. So I was in that. I was in the middle of it. I was taught evolution. I was taught Big Bang Theory. I was taught Old Earth Theory. I use those terms lightly, as we'll see. They're not actually theories. And, you know, peripheral things like climate change, which you can agree or disagree with without it affecting, obviously, young Earth biblical theory or any of that. But just some teachings that I was taught every day, all around me, that obviously had agenda and assumptions and presuppositions involved in them. So prior to coming to the University of Minnesota, I knew what the scientific method was, but in my classes I learned more about it. I learned how it worked in detail, and later on in senior research that I did in my last year, I actually was in the field doing my own research with scientists, and I got to see more hands-on how the scientific method actually works in real life, when it's not all like pre-canned, you know, we're going to go out in the middle of the desert and this is a particular area that's been studied over and over and over and over and over again, and the professor's got all of his notes, and so he's looking at a rock and you're like, what happened here? And he flips through his notes and go, oh, well, this is what happened here. That was what I experienced early on in geology, and that was sadly, that's not science. And so later on I was able to work in an unknown area with real scientists, and that really opened my eyes to how the scientific method really works. But what I saw day after day in my department was how my professors and the textbooks I would read, we were all reading, repeatedly presented untested hypotheses as if they were actually tested theories. And I saw how they presented, even worse than that, how they presented theories as if they were facts. Like this is a scientific fact, and they weren't. You know, they used words, well, just like that, like fact, theory, proven, truth, scientific consensus, etc., describing things that don't actually deserve those labels. So, you know, I woke up one day realizing that the bulk of what I was being taught came down to untestable ideas. They hadn't even made it through the scientific method. And so I went undercover. Really, I did that from the beginning. I didn't announce my beliefs, my presuppositions or my assumptions in opposition to their ideology and their agendas. Because often what happens is walls go up. People get polarized when they feel they're under attack, and they step back into a defensive stance. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to have honest discussions with my professors and fellow students. So I did that by attributing questions that I had to young Earth creationist friends of mine, which I had many at the time. And so I would just talk to my professors and I would say, well, you know, what do you say to people that I know who say this on this particular issue or whatever? And by doing that, I got my professors to share frank and honest discussions about science that perhaps wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And they admitted, many of them, in many of the situations, that their statements, what they were teaching, what they were pushing, was based on quite weak assumptions and presuppositions. And that really helped me open my eyes to how all of this was being perpetuated in the scientific community. And through these discussions, I even caused some of them to pause and think about what they were doing, you know, rather than simply just trying to assassinate their positions and argue and fight with them. So I thought that was the best approach, trying to get my degree, trying to get decent grades, not anger my professors and get everybody mad at me, but also have some good discussions. But I still couldn't understand how they'd all come to agree on these things that clearly violated or hadn't finished the scientific method. And then, you know, I realized slowly over time that it was through subtle tweakings of the definitions of what an observation is and what a test meant in the scientific method that they'd convinced generations of young scientists and the public that this was actual science. These were actual theories. These were actual facts they were talking about. And so just as a quick example, I mean, we'll get into more detail on these topics later, but, you know, in order for you to pursue an idea scientifically, you have to make an observation, right? Well, let's just take the theory of evolution. By its own definition, you can't actually observe it because we humans die every 70 to 100 years, right? And the idea is that evolution takes so long for the changes to happen in animals. We're talking macroevolution here, species to species, that we can't actually see that. We can't actually observe it. So the way they tried to get around that, one way, was, well, you see here there's this giant outcropping of sedimentary rock. There are all these layers of rock over here. And we see these bones of these creatures in this layer, but we don't see them in the next layer. Instead, there's a different creature of animal. And if we take these layers as time, like it's getting younger and younger and younger as we go up these layers, which is an assumption, of course, one that you learn in said strat isn't always well-founded, often isn't well-founded. But anyways, we'll just assume that these layers are getting younger as it goes up. These creatures disappear in this layer, and new creatures appear here. Well, what we're seeing right there is evolution. We're seeing macroevolution. We're seeing that this species turned into that species. Okay, that is not observation according to the scientific method. That is that's an assumption like 2, 3, 10 miles wide, and you're trying to jump from one edge of the cliff to the other, and it's 3, 10 miles wide. That is crazy. And yet we call that an observation. They call it an observation. They say, hey, we're doing this is an actual observation, scientific observation. And we're able to, this is a test. We're testing it. This is all wrong. This is not the way the scientific method works. But because they've successfully tweaked these definitions and gotten people to agree that that's observation according to the scientific method, they can then move forward and claim that evolution, macroevolution, is a theory. But it isn't. It can never be a theory because we can't actually observe it. We can't actually observe it happening in real time. All right. So, anyways, you know, don't get me wrong either. Ideas can be scientific. Hypotheses can be scientific. But that doesn't mean they're science. Ideas are great. I'm not against teaching evolution, macroevolution, but I think it needs to be taught as an idea, not as a theory, but as an idea. It's a possible explanation of how life progressed. But don't ever call it a fact. Don't ever call it a theory. Don't say this is established, this is true. Don't use those kinds of words because it's not true. Okay, it's just an untestable idea. We can't figure out a way to test it right now. So go ahead, teach it as an idea, along with another idea, young Earth creationism, that the Earth is actually quite young and it was designed. Let's work together here, teaching ideas that can't be tested. All right. So this is very important because in order for something to be considered science, it has to pass through the scientific method. And unfortunately, like I've described with evolution there and geology, much of what geology and astronomy and evolutionary biology teach today actually remains held up at the hypothesis step of the scientific method. It can't pass because it can't be tested. We can't actually observe this stuff and test it. Yet it's presented every day as theory and fact, like it actually has made it through the scientific method. Or it's just so obviously observable that it's actually a fact. Everybody knows. But you can't do that with any of this stuff. Okay, so it actually isn't science. It's hung up. It's scientific, but it's just an idea. It hasn't moved through the scientific method to actually be established science. Okay. So once I realized that as a geologist in training, my opinion of all old Earth geology soured. And I switched my focus to geology that can be directly observed today, like volcanic activity, earthquakes, magnetic fields, hence the geophysics degree that I pursued along with my geology degree. Because I realized getting a geology degree and learning all this stuff about the ancient processes that might have happened and how things might have formed and all of these periods in geological history, it was all fiction. It was science fiction. They were just ideas. And ideas are great, but that's not what I was there for. I was there for science, actual established science, things that we could observe and know and test. And hence I focused instead on geophysics. Well, I focused on both. I got another degree, something that actually was science, geophysics. Like I said, looking at volcanic activity, earthquakes, magnetic fields, planetary physics, all that stuff. Interesting stuff. So I graduated with my 2 degrees, and immediately I got a job as a scientist in an engineering support role for a innovative tech company. And they were working on underwater gliders, vehicles that are powered by temperature differences in the ocean, called thermoclines. So you have warm water at the top, cold water at the bottom, and you create an engine that runs off of that differential to drive the little submarine. And so with my geophysics background, knowing some things about oceanography, I was helpful in that process. That was my job, my role. And then the 2008 economic downturn happened, whatever you want to call it, and it wiped my whole field. It wiped that tech company out. It wiped out everything we'd been doing. There was no money. No one was interested in spending money on new and innovative ideas for that whole period of time because of all the uncertainty in the market. So I was unemployed for a while, partly because, I graduated with my geology degrees and I hadn't gone into the hard geo field. I'd gone into an engineering support role, and that whole field that I was in was wiped out. Couldn't get a job related to my experience. So, I was unemployed for a while. I worked a couple odd jobs here and there, and then I wound up getting an incredible opportunity in church ministry. I was a Christian, I was a believer. I hadn't been in church for most of my life. And then I went to a church, and my elder there gave me an opportunity to be involved in a ministry, to lead a ministry, a teaching ministry, teaching well, really, looking at any aspect of life from a biblical perspective. I could choose anything I wanted. Evolution, faith, grace, anything. And I could write about it and develop teaching based on it. It's an amazing opportunity. I wouldn't want to do anything else. And so through that process, I realized that I wanted to share with a broader audience out there some more fundamental basic stuff on a broader scale, broader sense, giving people the tools to look at the world around them, to understand it, not be driven around by this or that, or this fact or that fact, quote unquote, or this theory or that theory, or what people in power are telling you this is what's happening, and to be able to look at stuff yourself and analyze it and see questions that need to be asked, see tests that need to be performed that aren't being performed before you're going to agree with this or that or the other thing. And so that's what I hope to do with this channel, is to give you those tools. And so we'll be looking at all kinds of questions from a Christian perspective through the eyes of someone who's been educated as a scientist, who has a science background. We'll be starting out looking at setting the foundation of what is science and what isn't science, right? Is evolution science? Is the Big Bang science? Is the old Earth, the formation of the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, is that science, that idea that they've come up with? We'll look at all of these things in detail to help give you some encouragement, some tools, some abilities to talk to people you know about these things, and defend your own position, your own beliefs. We'll look at things like everyone on earth lives by faith. We'll be looking at that. Even and especially atheists, of all people. They live by faith. We'll look at conspiracy theories, how to analyze them from a Christian and a scientific perspective. Do you just throw them out? Do you believe them out of hand? Or what's the right approach to these things? We'll look at transhumanism, the modern war on nature, so to speak. We'll look at things as diverse as theological concepts like the Book of Enoch. What should a Christian think of that, and how can we approach that with like a scientific approach to understanding how should we take that, something like that. So we'll be looking at a lot of things with this channel. I hope to get to a lot of issues, really anything and everything. So let's get right into it, and I hope to see you out there. Hey everybody, Amendafish here, having to add something that Sci-Fi Fish forgot to mention in his introduction, which is if you have any questions or comments, or you would like something analyzed or looked at, leave it in the comments. Let me know. Send me a message. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to know what's bothering you, what you would like some thought put into or some advice on, and I'll try to get to it. I would like to be able to get to your questions, get to your comments, get to ideas that you have that you would like looked at, and I'll try to get to them all. Well, Sci-Fi Fish will try to get to them all. So, back to him. Sci-Fi Fish, logging out.